Manatee Rescue. We are on chapter 9. Manuela was amazed that Granny Raffi, who didn't really like lots of people altogether, was prepared to have the whole of San Lorenzo tramping over her property. But she kept her astonishment politely to herself. The next day, Raffi gave the girls paper and crayons, and they set about making posters to advertise Meet the Manatee Day, which would happen on the following Sunday. They decided that Libya should catch a ride back to San Lorenzo and Uncle Lewis's boat so she could pin up the posters all over the village and tell everyone about it. Lewis came by in the afternoon and dropped off Raffi's supplies. He was in a big hurry and ran up and down the steps with bags and boxes. "What's the rush?" Raffi asked. "Don't you ever look at the sky, Mama?" Lewis laughed and pointed at the black clouds. Sorry, I have hair in my mouth. My dog's hair. "I don't want to be bailing rainwater all the way home." He hustled Libya and a bag of posters into the boat. After so long in Libya's company, Manuela felt lost at the feeling of being without her cousin. They waved and smiled at each other as the boat pulled away. Tentico ran to the stern to keep Manuela in sight for as long as possible. As Manuela and Raffi walked back up to the house, giant raindrops began to fall. "I think Lewis is still going to be bailing for all his hurrying," Raffi said. Rain in the Amazon is not like rain anywhere else on Earth. Raindrops are fatter and wetter. They fall faster, and they're more tightly packed into the space between clouds and earth. By the time Raffi and Manuela reached the house, they were drenched and gasping for breath. Water had taken over the space where air normally was. They stood on the veranda, their voices drowned out by the deluge hammering on the roof, smacking onto the ground, and slapping over the millions of leaves in the forest. Raffi had to put her mouth right next to Manuela's ear in order to be heard. "Wait for the rain to ease off before you feed, ere you way." Manuela nodded and sat down under the cover of the veranda to wait, while Raffi went for a siesta. It's a nap. But the rain did not ease off. After an hour, Manuela decided she couldn't make Ariue wait any longer for his food. She made up a bottle and yelled to Raffi that she was going, forgetting that Raffi could not hear her above the noise of the rain. The jungle, the river, everything had disappeared in a shade of gray. So it took Manuela a moment to see what was happening at the pool. The flood waters, which had been 13 feet or more away from Ariue's pond, had risen so suddenly they had engulfed her. The pond was no longer an island of water in dry land, but simply another part of the river, only visible as a square of deeper water at the edge of the flood. And there was no sign of Ariue. Manuela immediately plunged into the flooded pool to look for him. The rainwater was cold, and Manuela gasped as it hit her skin. She dived again and again, searching the pool by touch, but there was no rubbery skin, no bristly nose. If Ariue had swum out to join the river, he could be swept away. Without a mother to feed and protect him, he would die. Manuela struggled back to the shore, picked up Ariue's bottle, and waded back into the water as deep as she could, while she still kept her feet on the bottom. Then she tapped the bottle with a stick. She did this every time she came to feed Ariue, and he had learned to associate the sound of the tapping on the stick with food, with the tapping on the bottle. She tapped the bottle repeatedly, pushing back tears that started to squeeze into her eyes. The water was rising fast, and the current was beginning to pick up, tugging at her legs. The rain still lashed down, blurring the water and the forest into a smudge of gray. Seconds felt like hours. Minutes felt like weeks. Then, Ariue's nose popped through the surface in front of Manuela. His solid round body hung in the water next to hers. He was too big now for her to hook an arm over his back, so she just held tightly to a flipper with one hand. So there she is. And then she's pushing down on a stick with the other hand to keep them in place. The current was threatening to push them over. Using the bottle to tempt him, Manuela shuffled backward into the shallow water where she could get some anchorage to prevent them from both being swept away. But she had forgotten that the pool was just behind her, and she went in over her head. When she kicked back up to the surface, she found that she was still holding the bottle and that Ariway was still hanging on to his dinner. She swam on her back, kicking hard with her feet and trying to pull them both closer to shore, but the current swirled them out further, closer to where the river rushed as fast as a galloping horse. Something banged against Manuela's shoulder. A branch. She let go of the bottle and grasped the branch tightly, pulling herself and Ariway closer and closer to it. Other branches caught at her legs and slapped her face, but they held Manuela and the manatee in place. As long as Manuela could hold on to Ariway with one arm and the tree with the other, they would not be swept away in the current. But they were not out of danger. The new flood water was so cold and baby manatees could die in cold water. Manuela shouted a few times but soon gave up. Calling for help was useless. Raffi would never hear her calling for help above the noise of the storm. She would just have to hope that her granny would notice she was gone and go to look for her. Manuela stretched her arm as far around Ariway as it would go. At least he didn't wriggle away. In fact, he seemed to want the comfort of her presence. She shut her eyes, leaned against him, and felt the rain beat down on her head. Frog, Frog! Her father's voice was calling her. Manuela opened her eyes, and there he was, leaning out of his boat and tying a rope around her. Raffi was at the stern, handling the outboard motor. Sylvia's face was full of worry and streaming with water. What are you doing here? Manuela gasped. Rescuing you, he said. It was almost dark. Manuela realized that she must have been out there in the water for hours. Her arm was still around Ariway. We'll tow you to shore, Sylvia called. Hold on to Ariway. Back in shallow water, Manuela's legs were almost too chilled and weak to hold her up, but she kept her arms around the manatee. We'll get him into the pail, said Silvio. Then we can drag him away from the water until the flood's gone down. We have to warm him up, Raffi added. He's too cold. And so are you, Frog, her father yelled. Let go of the manatee and go inside. Manuela shook her head. Silvio and Raffi looked at each other. Okay, said Silvio, then let's get this done. Manuela would not leave Ariway until she knew he was safe in the small tank. Then Raffi ordered Silvio to take her inside. Papa, Manuela whispered as he scooped her. Did you mean it when you said you wouldn't come back? No, said Silvio softly. Of course I didn't. Chapter 10. Morning was like a different world. The rush of the rain had subsided. The pool was once more surrounded by dry land. The sun was shining. By the time Manuela woke up, Ariway was back home in his pool, and the small tub hung on its hook at the far end of the veranda. Some things hadn't survived the flood. All that was left of Libya's school were soggy remains of the creations, the pink dolphin and the tree trunks. Libya will be upset, Manuela told her father. Her models might not have been very good, but they got people talking about the animals. I could make some models for you if you like. I was a good wood carver when I was a kid. Louis was too. Manuela looked at her father. You aren't angry with me anymore? He smiled. A bit. I didn't expect my frog to grow up so suddenly and fight me. I'm sorry, Papa, Manuela said. Sylvia shook his head. No, you did what you thought was right, and you made me think, not just about this baby, but about all the manatees. What if there were no manatees? What if there were no pirarucas? Those are another kind of Amazonian fish that grow up to 6 feet. What if there were no more pacas? Already there are few, but what if there were none? Sylvia blew out a long breath. That would be a terrible thing. Does this mean that you won't let Gomez take Ariway? You know, Frog, Sylvia smiled, I never much liked Clink Clink anyway. Come on, I'm going to find some wood. and carve a fish. Everyone came from San Lorenzo to meet the Manatee Day. They came because they were curious. They were curious about this family, Nurse Raffi and her animal patients, Silvio and Manuela, and the two girls, Manuela and Libya, who did ungirlish things and who were able to pull one over on Clink Clink. Seeing the baby manatee was just an excuse for them. But when they arrived at Riverbend, manatees were hard to avoid. There were homemade manatee posters and pictures everywhere in the house and on the veranda. There were even plates of manatee-shaped cookies and little signs saying, "Eat me, not real." Along the path leading from the back of Raffi's house, there hung wooden carvings of fish and turtles, giving a manatee's eye view of the river. There was even a puppet show put on by Angelina's littler daughters, with Pink Dolphin in a hat, a Sathi sloth, and a manatee named Kriya. And here's a picture of the day they created called Meet the Manatee Day. What a great idea. And they're teaching everybody how important the manatees are. So Angelina is Libya's mom. So that means some of Libya's sisters put on a puppet show. The people from San Leandro loved it. They couldn't remember when they had a better time. And to their surprise, the best thing of all was the manatee himself. Most people had eaten manatee, and many of them had killed them or seen their dead bodies lying in the bottom of canoes. But to be able to see a manatee alive and close up, to be able to watch it swim and turn with the white patch on its chest showing up to the sky, to be able to look into its strange little eyes and see those eyes looking back into yours, this was new. People sat beside the pool smiling. They were quite entranced. They simply loved Ariue. Only one thing spoiled the day, and that was when Jose Gomez showed up with his two thugs for sons. They turned up toward the end of the afternoon, and they laughed at everything. Some people who owed Gomez money or who thought he was important laughed along with him, but most people turned away from him. They were growing tired of Clink Clink and all his bullying. Manuela was in the water with Ariue, while Libya, who loved to perform, sat beside the pool and answered the questions people were asking about Ariue. Tintico pranced around, part of the show. When Gomez arrived, Libya's great-great-uncle, Miesel, was talking to the girls. "I'll bring some food for you and the creature," he told them. "It looks like he's big enough to begin to eat greens and leaves. He's big enough to begin to eat greens and leave the milk behind. I know all the kinds of plants that Ariue likes." Gomez disrespectfully pushed straight past the old man to speak to the girls. Ariue slipped under the surface, the white flash of his scars showing clearly through the water. "So, you're making money from my manatee, eh?" said Gomez. "We're not making any money, Mr. Gomez," said Manuela. "Sure," he smirked. "Just remember that he's mine, and I will get my property one way or another." Silvio stepped up behind him. "He's not yours, Jose," he said. "I gave you your money back." "You did me out of a profitable deal," Gomez replied, "and I won't forget it." He threw a manatee cookie into the pool. "I'd rather eat the real thing, and I will." "Thanks, and so will everyone else. Wait and see." Then he stalked away with his sons, and their noisy boat engine roared behind them. "Don't take any notice of him," Manuela's father said. "He's all talk." But Manuela wished that Gomez hadn't seen the scar that marked Ariue's back. She knew that was an easy way to identify him. Chapter 11. After Meet the Manatee Day, Raffi put a big check mark beside number 3 on their action plan. They had definitely made people like manatees more, and not just to eat them. The space beside number 4 stayed blank, however. No one had promised not to hunt manatees. Libya's great uncle brought a selection of floating plants for Ariwe, just as he said he would. He called it Farinha di Manatee, and he said it included different kinds like water lettuce and tender new grasses. He told them that he had seen manatees eating all of these kind of plants and more. But then he added that he hardly saw manatees at all nowadays. Manuela put the plants in Ariwe's pool and hoped that Ariwe would know what to do. At first, he took no notice of the plants as he had of Libya's models. But every time Manuela gave him a bottle, she brought the plants closer to his mouth and nibbled at them with her fingers. In a week, he began to nibble too. In a month, he was eating a few handfuls every day and drinking a little less milk. Manuela could see that the day would come when bucket loads of plants would replace a bottle for feeding. Then Ariwe would be ready for number 5, whether there was a check mark next to number 4 or not. And here's a picture of them trying to get him to eat the plants. Uncle Mizel got some of his old fishermen to help. Ariwe was so used to the bottle by now that Mizel and his friends could even feed him. They started spending some afternoons at Ariwe's pool, taking turns with the bottle or watching the manatee eat the food they had collected for him. Libya's manatee school got bigger and bigger as carvings of all kinds began to turn up at Granny's house at the river bend. The people of San Lorenzo were competing with one another to see who could make the best models, the ones that looked the most like fish and turtles and pink dolphins. Silvio, Louis, and Abel built a thatched roof from which the models could hang. Now when people came to see Ariwe, they could walk among the models, just as manatees swam among the real fish in the river. Raffi began to get used to the fact that the visitors arriving by boat at her jetty were just as likely as people coming to see a manatee as they were coming to get her help. The school boat then began to run again. Now that Ariwe's care was shared among several people in the village, Raffi made up a schedule to help. Manuela and Libya had no excuse not to go back to school. But students and teachers wanted to know now all about Ariwe. And for the first time, the girls became very popular among the other children. A visit was arranged for the whole class to see Ariwe. Children from other villages where fishing was not as important as it was in San Lorenzo loved the manatee school, and the teacher said that they would bring children to see it every year, even if Ariwe went back in the river. Manuela still went out on the river with her father, but she never missed school to do it anymore. There was a reason for her to work hard at her studies now. She wanted to learn more about manatees and the other animals that lived in the Amazon River. She began to think about other action plans for turtles and also maybe for Pyrrhorhacus. She could maybe ask her father for help. Her father nodded and said that many of the creatures had been hunted too much and that there were fewer now than there had been when he was a boy. Libya decided that she was going to write puppet plays about animals for children, and she spent all her spare time sewing puppets with her sisters. She made a special Ariwe puppet for Manuela with a line of white wool stitched down its back to show his scar. As Ariwe grew bigger, so did his circle of friends. All Manuela's family visited to help clean out the pool or to bring food. Fishermen came by with new carvings or just to see how Ariwe was doing. Raffi had to make her jetty bigger so more boats could tie up safely. And she admitted that before Ariwe came, she sometimes had felt a little lonely. People told Manuela and Libya about creatures they had seen, dolphins, big fish, and birds, as well as manatee. And Libya began to keep a record of what everyone saw out on the river, because she said it might help them to find the best place when the time came for Ariue to go back into the river. Now, on the school boat in the mornings and in the afternoon, all the children had their eyes on the lookout for birds and would make a small check mark beside. And so a small check mark appeared beside "Find out where manatees like to live" on the action plan. But there still was no check mark beside number 4. But sometimes change happens too slowly to be checked off a list. So remember, number 4 in their action plan is to get people to stop hunting them. Let me look for that action plan again. Here it is. Yeah. Number 4 is agree to get people to stop hunting them. And number 5 is to return the manatee to the river. Find out where's the best place to put him. So that's what they're working on now. Okay, I'll read more soon.